Thank you for your time. I appreciate you being here. Please keep in mind what we're doing here on Bet on It Food for Thought and Shooting from the Hip. We explore human ideas, philosophies, and noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud. Thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and re-examining them. You will find we are prone to using adult language and expressing opinions. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything we say. We are not experts of any kind. We are just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information in the hopes that you will find it fun and interesting. We encourage you to invest time in searching out these subjects and come to your own conclusions. Now on with the shit show. And as always, I'm your host, Beitullah. Slim, what goes?
Oh, that's a lot. There's a lot going, man.
Is there a lot? So much. It's so much. There's so much. So on today's episode of Shooting from the Hip, we are going to discuss Plato's Allegory of the Cave. But we're not going to actually read it. I strongly recommend. It's short. It might be like 12 pages, I think. So you might want to give it a read. We're going to try and cover it or discuss it in detail, even though we're not going to actually read it. I just didn't want to spend like that much time on camera reading it when you could probably do it on your own. However, having said that, we're really going to dive into the different themes and explore it in as detailed a way as we possibly can. So I hope you're ready, because here it goes. Okay, so essentially, I think we need to kind of start with, I'm just going to start with this statement. Presence of mind, to be in the moment, to pay attention, is the best weapon to guard oneself in every aspect of life. So I don't think anybody would dispute that. Now, Plato's famous Allegory of the Cave was written around 380 BCE. So it is one of the most important and influential passages in his Republic. So it was a passage within a much larger text that he wrote. So it's one of the most significant pieces of work in literary history. At least it's often cited and recognized as such, right? So, and it illustrates the concepts of idealism as is taught in the Platonic Academy, and provides a metaphor which philosophers have used for millennia to help us overcome superficiality and materialism, right? So again, it's informed so many who came after it. And it still carries weight, resonates right here into the present day. So thousands of years after it was initially presented, right? So the specifics of it, in this dialogue, Socrates is the main speaker and explains to Plato's brother Glaukon that we all resemble captives who are chained deep within a cavern, who do not yet realize that there is more to reality than the shadows that we see against the wall. So that's the gist of the cave. It's the scenario that they present. And we'll dive into that, but before we do that, I do want to clarify like who Plato was and why. Again, it may make it more easy to understand what he was trying to say. Now, having said that, he was the son of a wealthy nobleman. Plato was from 427 to 347 BC, before the Common Era, and was preparing for a career in politics when the trial and eventual execution of Socrates, my favorite philosopher, in 399 before the Common Era, changed the course of his life. He abandoned his political career and turned to philosophy, opening a school on the outskirts of Athens dedicated to the Socratic search for wisdom. So he was profoundly moved by his teacher, right? And so we know very little about Socrates, and what we do know is a result of Plato's writings. So Plato's school, then it was simply known as the Academy. It was the first university in Western history. It operates from 387 BCE until 529 in the Common Era. So unlike his mentor Socrates, Plato was both a writer and a teacher, and he wrote in the form of dialogues. Socrates was his principal speaker. In the Allegory of the Cave, Plato describes symbolically the predicament in which mankind finds themselves and proposes a way of salvation. So, and I often cite this, that salvation, if you require a savior, that means you're dependent on something outside of yourself, and that salvation exists in you, the individual. You have the capacity to save your own ass. And so we're gonna jump into that more deeply in just a moment. The allegory presents in brief form most of Plato's major philosophical assumptions. His belief that the world revealed by our senses is not the real world, but only a poor copy of it, and that the real world can only be comprehended intellectually. His idea that knowledge cannot be transferred from teacher to student, but rather that education consists in directing students' minds towards what is real and important, and allowing them to comprehend it for themselves. So we did have an episode where we talked about Montessori education, and this essentially parallels his thinking, right? So there is a way to educate people, that not for standardized testing and to pass tests and the stress of meeting those demands, and then what the outcome is, you can produce a higher stability and occurrences of wisdom in the individuals. I'll leave it at that. And he ultimately felt that the universe was a good place, right? So whether or not that, not everybody who's maybe watching this might believe that to be true. I don't know that I subscribe to it. I think it's an indifferent place. I don't think it's good or bad. It just does what it does, right? That's my position. Yeah, I mean,
My position is that was a very positive outlook he had.
well, I think it really did reflect that thinking, his thinking rather. That, so he juxtaposed it on and saw that life was good, and that maybe perhaps therefore the universe might be good. I would never go so far as to say that. To me, it just seems like this thing that does its own thing. And maybe the lessons in there that if it's doing its own thing, you just do your own thing, and that's good enough. Yes. His conviction that enlightened individuals have an obligation to the rest of society, and that a good society must be one in which the truly wise are the rulers, and he referred to them as philosopher kings. Right. So in our troubled times. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to look at the political classes that we're aware of in the West, and to come to the conclusion that they are not philosopher kings. They're not founded in wisdom. They're whatever they are, but they're right. But I would dare say that they do not meet Plato's idea of an enlightened individuals.
Yeah, they definitely don't have a high regard for philosophy. I haven't heard any of them say anything about philosophy.
Or how about just demonstrating like real insight and wisdom? They're more often than not, they're self-grandizing. They're they follow the ad hominem attacks on each other, and worse, use the tactics of the straw man to sort of like address any kind of perceived dissent from around them. I go, there's no wisdom in that. Where's the wisdom in that? Right? So I do digress. So the allegory can be found in his book 7 of Plato's best-known work, The Republic, a lengthy dialogue on the nature of justice. So that's the Republic, but the Republic's, it's just that small section within the Republic where you'll find the cave, right? And so in the Republic, I think he was trying to do, he dedicated to this discussion and education required to create philosopher kings. That's why he wrote it. That maybe that those people who aspired to leadership, that maybe they would seek something to inform them, to give them insight so that they could conduct themselves in such a way that they could make a significant contribution to not just the society, but all the individual members that make it up, right? So what is society other than its individual membership? So I think it was his thoughts on what would constitute healthy leadership and good quality leadership, which is something that I think even to this day that we kind of we do struggle with. I think that because we kind of live in the cult of personality, where the more over the top and the more gregarious and the more just the way that they're more concerned with the way they present than anything else. And so, having said that, I'm just going to keep moving on. So the allegory represents a larger point about society or human nature. So this is what he thought through a simple story, right? So that's why he uses the allegory. You tell a story to illustrate a point, right? So unlike a metaphor where it's not so much like the complexity of a story, you just kind of relate something to something that's unrelated but illustrates the point, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's why he chose the allegory, because it was the ability to tell a story to illustrate the point he was trying to make. In which different characters may represent real life figures, sometimes situations, and the story may echo stories from history and modern day life without explicitly stating the connection. So it's not so much about the connection to the real world. It's what it says about the real world that's really important, right? Both allegories and metaphors illustrate an idea by making a comparison. However, allegories are complete stories with characters, while metaphors are brief figures of speech, right? So just to clarify, right? So that there's no confusion. So in the allegory of the cave, a group of people have lived chained to a wall of a cave all their lives, facing a blank wall. The people watch shadows projected on the wall from objects passing in front of a fire behind them, which they can't see, and give names to these shadows, right? The shadows are the prisoner's reality, but are not accurate representations of the real world. It's the world of their perception and the limits of what they can experience. So they're limited experience because their experience is limited because they're chained to a wall. So whatever limits there are, that's how they formulate their view of reality, right? The shadows are the prisoner's reality. They really, to them, that constitutes what they know, what they experience, and that becomes their real world. Right? So the shadows represent fragment of reality which we can normally perceive through our senses, while the objects under the sun represent the true forms of objects that we can only perceive through reason. So the things we experience through our senses aren't necessarily what's real. It's only when we apply our intellect and seek understanding that then you can it alludes to a much larger reality, right? So I don't think anybody would argue that. I think that we're often misled by what we think we're seeing and experiencing, because it may not necessarily accurately be what's actually occurring. It's what we think's occurring, right? So you can see where this can get quickly convoluted. Anyway, a prisoner is freed from the cave and comes to understand that the shadows on the wall are actually not the direct source of the images seen. The prisoner begins to understand, perceive the higher reality. However, the other inmates of the cave do not even desire to leave their prison, for they know no better life. Right? So they become comfortable in their fear and discomfort because it's familiar to them. It's in that familiarity that they derive a sense of stability, because it's always consistently the same. So the fear of the unknown will keep them trapped in what's familiar, right? So it's actually really sad, because I think just described most people living today.
I mean, it's a reasonable fear to have, but at the same time, it's better to know than to not know.
Well, I think it kind of, when you do that, if you're seeking stability, it ignores the reality, the much larger reality, that all life is a risk. It's inherently risky. And you can live to protect yourself from that, insulate yourself from the risk of living, but that doesn't prevent it from it demonstrating that, like, how harsh and risky it is. There's only so much you can do to insulate yourself from the risks of living. There's no way to hide from it. So I would argue that you would be better served by embracing the risks and becoming comfortable taking risks. And then at the very least, then, you could take some kind of comfort from knowing that you risked greatly, instead of, hiding from risk and then just seeking a life of comfort. Right? Anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that just sounds like every classic story of self-resentment and that feeling of you regret not doing something.
Right. So why live? So if you embrace risk, isn't one of the first casualties of embracing risk is regret? There's nothing to regret. You did try it all. Right.
I mean, you could regret doing it, but at the same time, if it's a relatively normal thing you're doing, like exercising. Oh, I regret working out that hard. Well, you can do it again, just do less.
Right, you can self-correct, right? There's some degree of good judgment that comes in there. You don't recklessly abandon yourself to the risk. You thoughtfully abandon yourself to the risk. Those are two very different things, right? So approaching everything thoughtfully, you weigh everything out and you consider things deeply before you make a judgment one way or the other. So Plato concludes that the other prisoners would likely kill those who try to free them, and they would not want to leave the safety and comfort of their known world, right? And wasn't that didn't we see that in the first Matrix movie? Didn't he state that clearly, like that there were some people who were plugged into the network of those human energy machines who would do everything to protect, because they just didn't know any better, and if you tried to free them, they would just basically turn on you. So again, it's illustrated. We see the origins of that here in Plato's cave, right? So that's the risk you run. So if you become the freed prisoner, and then you go like out of concern for your fellow man, you try to free them. It might be to your own end, right? So the fellow prisoners inside the cave will believe that the outside world is harmful to them, and the truth is not worth seeking. That, unfortunately, is a reality I think that we encounter, whether you live in Plato's Allegory of the cave or not. Maybe living within the context of modern day society might be a modern day equivalent of Plato's Allegory of the cave, right? Am I being redundant? Right? So there's 5 stages of the allegory of the cave. There's the allegorical meaning, the imprisonment in the cave, which is the world of perception and interpretation, release from the chains, breaking with the perceptions, an ascent out of the cave, the world of ideas, sense experience, real experience. And then 5 would be the desire to help our fellow man, right? Or his fellow prisoners. The freed prisoner has often been equated as the philosopher, right? So that he's the one who seeks knowledge outside of the cave and outside of the senses, who does not at first understand reality, and then eventually becomes condemned for his attempts to try and broaden himself and to learn of the much larger reality outside of his perception. So, just sounds like everybody who's had personal conflict, struggled with themselves to find their place in the world. And I think that regardless of what time period you're born into, I think that, again, another really super common human experience, right? There's some of us who are just happy and contented within confines and the restrictions and limitations of society. And then there are others who are constantly looking past that, looking to grow beyond those limitations, those structures. You experience that in your life yourself?
Oh no, I've never been through a crisis. But yeah, it's strange that people they'll look for identity, they'll look for a sense of what's comforting. You know, this idea. Oh, I'm gonna find myself. It's like that's a never-ending process.
Yeah,
Like,
I would agree.
I've heard before. Like you have to never take this literally. You have to kill yourself in the moment to become reborn in the next moment as what you will become. Like this idea of like you got to collapse the possibilities of the future.
Right, right. I've heard it described in the same way too, but I've also heard it referred to as having that childlike enthusiasm from moment to moment, and then when a moment passes, it's, as you say, it's dead to you because it's past, so it's no longer relevant. So the only thing that's relevant is the enthusiasm for the current moment as you're experiencing it, and then all you do is recycle that from moment to moment to moment to moment to moment.
I like that way of expressing it because it also admits that you're growing into what you are, and it's not like anybody's going Benjamin Button.
Well, but you're right. that was interesting. I think that because children, they're depending on their stage of development, they're free from a lot of inhibitions that we would have as adults. So it's easier for them to be enthusiastic, for every moment of their waking hours, right? Because they're not struggling against all the social and cultural conditioning and all the programming, brainwashing, however you want to do it. The exposure to all that stuff influences the way our brains operate as adults, but they're free from a lot of that, especially as small children, and so you can see the value in like that abandonment to the moment that it's the only thing that's kind of worthy of your attention. Because everything else takes you away from the present. So if you're projecting on the future, ruminating about the past, you can't be here. Because you can't do those things all at the same time. You're either doing one or the other. So you're either present in the current moment, or you're thinking about what's going to occur tomorrow, or regretting what happened yesterday. So again, perception versus reality, right? Because what do any of us really have other than this current moment, right? Is that fair to say? Do you agree? Disagree?
I would say it's the most important thing we have. It's just the moment because it's intangible, but at the same time, it's like I don't know how to say it. It's the most pervasive thing. Like we're all living right now. These people watching it aren't living in the moment we're living in right now.
No, because in the moment we're recording the moment for
Right.
posterity. So I mean, now it's now part of the public record. So we live or die by what we say. So, you're right. But that was always true, whether you're on camera or not. Like.
Yeah.
So you live and die by the choices you make, by the things you say. So and what you would say and do is often informed by your perception or interpretation of things. So if you're interpreting reality to reflect your preferences, biases, or prejudices, or you can come at reality objectively, and then you have objective reality. And again, it means having the wherewithal to recognize when you're subjectively interpreting reality versus when you're objectively looking at it, right? There's lots of room for mistake in there, but that's okay, so long as you're trying to balance the two out. Yes?
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, cool. So the darkness and the shadows in the allegory, they symbolize ignorance. Because remember, the prisoners assign names. They give them names. They look to see the shadows moving. That becomes their experience of reality, but it's not based on anything. It's just what's presented in front of them. So what limited sense experience they have, they end up out of ignorance kind of seeing all of that as reality, when we know that couldn't be further from the truth, right? Those trapped in the cave only know the darkness and do not understand that the shadows they see are not the truth of what they are. They're simply representations, right? So, and again, I think that it's common, even especially in today's society, that this is a common occurrence. It's not something that just exists within the allegory of the cave. That the allegory of the cave perfectly illustrates what's going on, and probably in all likelihood, what's always gone on since it was first written. So this is not new. It's something that's probably an ongoing part of our human history. That this is the thing that we struggle with, right? That people are interpreting reality, and they take the representations to be the truth, right?
Of course, it's insane to say that reality isn't reality. I've been looking at this wall my whole life. Like, I know what's going on. It's like, well, have you ever asked, is that a representation? Is there a more genuine way to see it?
Well, but that requires then exploration, or another way of saying investigation, that you take on the responsibility of trying to cultivate a deeper understanding. That then you need the tool of exploration, investigation, to facilitate a more profound or a deeper understanding, right? Because that's lies at the root of everything, right? So then the lack of that can only lead to ignorance, and worse, arrogance.
The comfort in ignorance.
Right. So there you go. It's the ongoing struggle, right? So when people leave the cave, everything immediately becomes clear to them, right? Because once they're outside the cave, then suddenly they experience reality. But if you take my meaning, that once they exit the cave, they've only entered a much larger cave, even though it's the world at large, right? Because it's still a microcosm. It's the surface of the planet instead of the bowels of the planet. But it's not representative of the entirety of reality, which is the universe, right? So again, it happens incrementally. But having said that, it could also be seen as the liberation from your social and cultural conditioning, and then suddenly awakening to a much larger reality, which means that we're all humans, regardless of how we divide ourselves in the way that we view ourselves. Like, the cave can be your cultural and social, or rather is cultural and social conditioning, and your prejudices and biases and preferences. Those are the cave, right? So, and you can break with those, but every time you break with them, you have to ask yourself: is this just another cave? Am I deluding myself, right? Like, I've broken from one delusion only to accept another, right? So that's the constant struggle, seeking truth, whatever that might mean. And to me, there's no absolute truth. There's only the truth of the moment, right? So when initially they're freed, it's a traumatic experience too, right? So you're going to have all sorts of negative emotions associated with it, like perhaps anger and resentment. There's going to be difficulty, their eyes adjusting to like a well-lit daytime, which they've never experienced, because they only had firelight lighting their what they experienced to be their reality in that cave, right? So the light symbolizes enlightenment and wisdom and learning and new experiences. So exiting the cave, that's what that is. It's the awakening of the individual to have greater greater insights and greater sense of self as a result of like these new and different experiences and learning more than what they previously knew, right? But eventually they do adjust now to all this new enlightenment or these new experiences, and then as a result of that, they grow and they experience a new reality. So again, it kind of summarizes everything that goes on even to today. Yeah. The cave demonstrates something about humans, that human perception and interpretations are easily manipulated by what they see and what they are told to think. All right, so, and we know this to be true. We, again,
historically,
I think from even before the time of the cave, before Plato wrote the Allegory of the Cave, we know that these things are going on. It's just that these, as far as we know in terms of Western philosophy, this is the first time that it was really kind of presented in a way that very accessible now to anybody who hears the allegory or reads the allegory.
I was going to say, even without the allegory, I think we each experience this at some point.
Well, I think so too. I think it's fair to say that it's everyone's experience, or can be. It's not that everyone has the experience. There's a lot of people who are so well indoctrinated, they're just happy to live out that indoctrinated life. They don't want to grow beyond that. To them, they're perfectly contented, or at least they perceive that they're perfectly contented.
Yeah, like the idea of coming out of the cave and going, "Oh, I was the dummy." There's nothing wrong with that. That's
that's growth. That's learning, right? So in the allegory, they think the entire reality is the shadows and what they see on the walls. Plato criticizes humanity for not questioning what is real. So we often close episodes with question everything, and I think again you can see where where I draw that from, right? So I think because there's value in it, and any forward thinker, anybody of note, I think is foundational in who they are. The idea that you can't accept anything as you see it, experience it. That requires you to look deeper, it requires investigation, it requires you to make an effort of yourself to make sense of things, so that you're not bamboozled or baffled by bullshit. That you're dialed in. You're seeking understanding, so that you're better able to navigate reality. Work for you? Works for me.
Yeah, I think you mentioned once that wisdom isn't like intelligence where you gain it. Intelligence is the ability to kind of sift through the BS.
Yeah, here's an interesting. I think this is a metaphor that illustrates the point. So, intelligence is knowing that cherry tomatoes and tomatoes are fruit. Wisdom is not putting the cherry tomatoes or the tomatoes in your fruit salad.
I'm laughing off camera. I don't know if I...
Right? Because typically, because nobody ever gives it any thought, they just assume that tomatoes are vegetables, but they're not, they're fruit. But that's intelligence. That would be like knowledge, right? It's representative of the idea of like a deeper knowledge. But wisdom is you just going like, hey, just because that's a fruit, I'm not having it with like cherries and grapes and
yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, if that's your thing, it's fine.
But yeah, whatever floats your boat. Plato believed that if people do not desire to learn what's true, then they cannot be forced to learn. So that is I 100% agree with, right? That old adage that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
I like saying that exact same phrase, but I change it a little bit. I say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it look at its reflection.
Well,
it depends on the context.
Yeah, but however you would choose to word it, it illustrates the point, right? That you can't force anyone to learn, but what you can, they have to have a desire to learn new things and to understand. And I think that's innate. Because remember when we talked earlier about human nature, right? Because this often comes up with the idea of that, like, what is human nature? And so there's 6 things that I identify as human nature, and 3 of them are intelligence, curiosity, and creativity. So if guided correctly, those will do all the work. It's the entire foundation of the Montessori educational system, where they allow for the child's own intelligence, their curiosity, and their creativity to guide deeper, more profound insights. So it speaks to what Plato's talking about here, that you can't force someone to learn, but if you set up the circumstances so they're conducive to learning, they'll just do it on their own. Right? They'll do it as a result of their nature. Whereas those who were chained to the walls and saw the shadows dancing from the fires they couldn't see on the walls, and their belief in that's behavior. So behavior requires you to be enslaved or chained. Right? You become married to ideas, married to very particular biases, preferences, prejudices. Right? But real intelligence, curiosity, and creativity, they'll follow things to their natural conclusions. Because they'll seek understanding. They'll just simply want to know more. Right? So, but you have to sort of create the environment that's conducive for that.
Yeah, like it's easy to conform because the form is there. Don't conform just because it's there. Do it because it's right in the moment.
Well, but again, most people don't. When you think about it, by and large, most of us don't ever give it a second thought. They take it for granted, right? So, and again, much like when we discussed breathing in the episodes about breath work and meditation, something that people completely take for granted. They just assume, I breathe, I know what the hell I'm doing.
I've been doing it my
right?
life.
I think, right? I think that I'm, well, there's a way to think that perhaps maybe that what you're thinking is an accurate reflection of what's actually occurring. That it might just be what you think is occurring.
Yeah, it's strange. There's different ways to think about things, and then there's not really thinking, there's reactive behavior, so it's like, I think I'm thinking, or I'm reacting in a way that makes me
I think reaction's more fueled by emotion. It's less thinking. It's thinking fueled by your emotions, so that's why it's a reaction. Whereas so you have to think of it as that it's
doing without thinking.
Yeah, it's a direct response to stimuli. Whereas if you choose to take an action, there's a pause.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to stifle or stop or inhibit somebody when they take that moment to pause. Like patience is is a virtue. Yeah, it's crazy. But if do you wanna? I'll save that for in a bit. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. I was good. Keep going, but it's okay. Just hold that thought. The escaped prisoner had to have desire and a willingness to learn, to allow for them to escape. So anyone who breaks with traditions, breaks with norms, there's somebody who's looking for more. Not necessarily always in a good way, but it's certainly what's driving them, that they're trying to understand things in a broader sense, or trying to make sense of things. And then, so that's what leads to them breaking with conventions, breaking with conformity, breaking with perceptions, right? So, and in the case of the allegory of the cave, that's what drove the prisoner, the desire for learning and a willingness to learn, right? Which honestly should be the hallmark of every individual's life, that they have expressed desire and willingness to learn, and in a constant state, that it's focused. You spend the entirety of your existence trying to understand. I can't imagine. I can't imagine not living like that.
I was thinking, makes sense that that's a very good attribute to have, just this desire for knowledge. Whereas you look at people that would say, I think I'm done learning for my lifetime.
Well,
It's
because
like,
they
what's left? Entertainment?
well, because they think they know everything, and I'm like, man, well, and you're right. Then it's just about being entertained or distracted. So then you just pick a form and you just leap in both feet into your whatever type of distraction does it for you, and then that's how that becomes the focus of your existence. And then here's the question: is that really existing?
Is is that even the most entertainment, like
Or most
one-to-one
entertaining
relation?
way to exist?
Yeah,
Only, again, only the individual can answer the question, right? I hate to go back to this expression, but you lead a horse to water, right? So each and every one of us, you provide them the opportunity to do it, but then it's up to them to do it. There's no value in trying to forcibly get them to broaden their horizons. There has to be a willingness entirely on the individual alone to do that. And some people are just happier not thinking. They just give me as much as I can drink, eat, smoke, and that'll be the entirety of my existence. Right? So,
well, they have to be placated too, because like you can't just do those things. You still have to work, and then they're gonna be stressed from work.
right. Okay, but I mean that's where they'll derive all their meaning and value in their life, is from the ability to go to work, so you can generate enough money so they can finance their form of distraction or whatever it is, so that they don't have to dig too deeply in the course of their own existence.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. There's these structures that we have, like the way we think, the way we be entertained, the way we socialize. It kind of puts us in a place where it's more comfortable to not explore reality, what being a human is.
Well,
Or
I
even
think
personal. I don't want to say identity, but personal uh, actualization.
okay. So I completely agree with you, but I think people often sometimes they're just satisfied with less. And what do you do with somebody who, like, for them, they want to view being human as just being, a machine, and just going to feel the machine, enjoy the ride, and then when it's done, it's done. They have the right to that limited expression, right?
Yeah, the way you stated it made it seem not too bad, but realistically,
Well, because I would argue that no matter what you did, that it would what you would discover it would never be enough. Eventually, you would need more, and I'm like, how much more?
how much more can you get out of life if you really lived it fully?
Well, I think that's self-evident. I think that if you actively pursued a full life, a meaningful existence, then it becomes its own reward. But if you pursue a life where all you're seeking is entertainment and greater levels of distraction, that's the thing. Once you start distracting yourself, whatever it is you choose as your form of distraction, you're going to need greater quantities of that distraction to continue the distraction, because you'll adapt to the distraction, and then so whatever initial amount of it you needed, it won't be enough. It won't satisfy. So then you'll need more. So then you're caught in this trap where now you'll, isn't it the very foundation of the whole idea of gateway drugs, right? Like,
I was thinking more along the lines of consumerism.
well, but consumerism too. Like it's a way to, again, to distract yourself. Just spend enough. Well, what if you have a fixed income, and what you want to do is spend like you're affluent? Kind of a problem there, right? Or the potential for an enormous problem, and then we wonder why people struggle and have such a problem within the context of society. To me, it's not a secret. Like, it's just, it creates this kind of. It's not insanity. It's not sane though. So it's unsane behavior. Does that make sense?
I was just gonna say it's like a deterioration of like our social interactions, or maybe the way one person would socialize themselves, because
Well,
they are doing it to themselves.
right. No one's imposing it on them. They're exercising their freedom to live that way. I'm just saying that in that choice of living that way, if that's your perception of your reality, that ultimately it'll never provide like a complete sense of satisfaction. It'll always feel as though it's lacking, so that you'll need more of the distraction, more because you're constantly looking for greater sense of satisfaction. Where if you're actively spending your life in driving, you know, the limit, pushing the limits of who and what you are, and constantly looking to to learn and grow beyond where you currently are, then it becomes this thing that's richly satisfying, and it doesn't matter, because every time that you push past a new limitation, there'll be even greater sense of satisfaction. So then you can spend an entire lifetime where then at the end of the life you feel richly rewarded, that you feel as though that it was purposeful and meaningful, your existence, and all you did was seek knowledge and seek to learn and to attain and maintain a balanced existence. To me, there's way more value in that, right? Like, but you the individual has to define it, and there's no value in it being force fed to you, that you come to that conclusion entirely on your own, but you draw from the experience and benefit of others. That's what the allegory of the cave is, right? It's the him presenting that his insights and his line of reasoning in a way that's accessible, and that then would be easy for someone to understand, relatively easy for somebody to understand. Yes?
Yeah, we're we're very good at being consumers, influencers, but trailblazers too.
Well, I think it's just about just finding your own path. Okay, so I'm using even though in the Mandalorian, like what did they say? This is the way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, in karate traditions, the way karate literally translates as empty-handed way, and so very often the way that that's interpreted means that like without weapons, and it's not. People invested in karate or study karate, the history of karate. That's not what that means. It illustrates that the mind is empty, that it's open, it's prepared to receive. That's the way of openness. So that is the way, right? So I have been a student of the way for the majority of my life, and I've never found anything quite nearly as satisfying, right? And I'm not a fiction. It's my culture, right? I didn't choose. I never chose mainstream culture, but that's a culture that I chose, and I chose it because it was reflective of all of this, right? Everything that we talk and discuss, that its roots for me is in Eastern thinking and Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy. To me, it's the amalgamation of both, right? So that's my culture, that's my way, right? So that's why we do this, right? Because this is the way. Having said that, like back to the allegory of the cave. So the meaning is a symbolic representation of how human beings live in the world, contrasting reality versus our interpretation of it, right? So the world inside the cave and the world outside the cave, right? It's, again, can be seen as what the actual or reality versus the perception of reality, or your preferences or your bias, or objectivity versus subjectivity, right? And that ultimately, that then you're left to seek balance or not. You can lean one way or the other. Again, that's entirely preferential. Cave symbolizes the world we live in. In the way that it's limiting and its restrictive ideas, its culture, its socialization, and its religion. So that the cave you can accurately say that it's a metaphor then for society and modern day society, today's society. It's probably been true for every society that's come into existence since Plato's time, right? So I find that kind of here it's still something that we're confronted with, that thousands of years into the future, and we still struggle with it. Yes. Okay. It is an apt description of our reality. The idea that the cave, which kind of informs the way you're supposed to see everything, and it does it through these. Through its ideas, and these ideas tend to be, they place limits on what you should and should not do in terms of behaviors, and that's influenced by your culture, socialization, religion, education. All of these things impact who and what you think you are. All right, so all of that stuff all together is the cave. Yeah,
it's a lot.
Yeah, it is. So interpretation and perception is the world inside the cave. The prisoners in the cave, the shadows on the wall created by the firelight, are all they know to be real. These shadows on the cave walls consistently change. So there's no stability in the consistency offered even in that environment for those who bear witness to it. So it may even produce a sense of unease in them. But because it's familiar and it's all they know, they just endure it. And think about, so if our contemporary society is the equivalent of the cave, and those who live within it live in fear, they live in conditions where you could characterize as being uneasy, so that they become comfortable in emotional distress because it's familiar. So there's some level of comfort. And then you look at contemporary society, which is kind of a metaphor, or the cave's a metaphor for contemporary society. And what's on a dramatic increase within contemporary society? Mental health issues. I've heard it referred to as a crisis. It's because it's on the increase. Now, whether you want to assign it to pandemic or stuff, I think it was always an inherent part of it, and an inherent part of living in an unnatural way. And when you're asking, what's the unnatural way? Well, the unnatural way would be to live as purely as a consumer and a competitor. All right, and then all those other things. Your socialization, your culture, education, all these things that are part of society are also impacting that. And so then they create this level of expectation that no one can live up to. And then we secretly live in dread of our existence. But because this is all we know, then you have no choice. So then what do you end up having to do to deal with it? Medicate.
Yeah, they're finding their way to be uncomfortable, or
comfortable with their discomfort.
I was trying to find a way to phrase it differently than, when you say the best thing to do is be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Right.
Add stressors, train yourself.
To me, it was always, the idea is that you're supposed to push past those things that make you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right?
I think you say it perfectly.
Yeah, so you become but their comfort is a materialist version of comfort. So it's not really comfort, it's sedation. I'm talking about you experiencing the raw discomfort and then forcing yourself to be okay with it.
Yeah.
To not exhibit fear in the face of it, because you suddenly begin to realize there's nothing really to be afraid of. You're just uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're learning to become comfortable with the uncomfortable, whereas
with uncomfortability, where what typically goes on.
They're uncomfortable looking for their comfort.
So they find how they find their comfort and sedation. They sedate themselves. So then so it doesn't matter which drugs you use. You can use illicit drugs. You can use recognized pharmaceuticals. That's what they're doing. So whether it's legitimate or illegitimate, they're trying to do everything they can not to have to face their existence. So it's a form of distraction, right? So the use of anything that would, because it can be sex, it can be food, you could do that too. Those things are equally distracting. But the problem with all that stuff is that it's all empty and hollow.
Yeah. We're consumers of everything, and we consume a lot of everything.
Right, and then we turn on each other because we're forced to we operate under the sense of competition, so that we're competing with each other. Even in our most intimate relationships, there's elements of competition. You go like no wonder that almost everything we do has a component of dismal failure. Everything that we do. Yes, they're success stories, but they're, if not equal, more failures. So then instead of seeking it outside yourself, so short of chemical imbalance, instead of seeking to sedate yourself to do everything not to have to experience reality, here's a radical thought. How about you force yourself to confront it and face it and let it be miserable and shitty and then recognize that those things aren't real. So if you're wondering what the fuck I'm talking about, Dave Goggins is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. That in that misery and discomfort, because it's so familiar, you can almost feel good about feeling shitty. And that it's not until you break with feeling shitty that you go, it doesn't matter how you feel. It's not relevant anymore. It's just a feeling, right? Because it's too much emphasis is placed on that, and that you can move past all of that, and it doesn't have to be about feeling anymore. And then you can go, then you can endure anything. And it's not even an endurance, because endurance implies that somehow like it's a burden. It's not a burden. It's not it's not dismissal of it like like careless or reckless kind of. You just suddenly recognize it for what it is. It's just pain. It's temporary. It'll pass. So no longer burdened by it. And it's not reckless dismissal of it. Reckless dismissal of the pain would be taking something to numb yourself from the pain. Don't numb yourself from it. Embrace the pain. And then you're liberated from it.
It's sad. Some people are proactively taking in fast food, and it makes them feel much worse later on down the line.
But
it's like comfort now is more beneficial than real comfort later on.
Well, because they're...
Or that's their argument.
Well, but again, it just happens to be, say, for a particular person, it might be their form of, it's their preferred method of distraction. They just, they just wrap themselves up in food. And
I love food.
Yeah, well, but
it's hard not to.
Well, but do you? Here's a question then. Do you feel that your association with it is unhealthy?
No.
Okay. But for some there is, because what kind of food are they eating? Stuff that's sugar rich or heavy carb. It's not that carbs are evil. You should have them, but you shouldn't have them to the quantity, particularly that most North Americans have them at. So, having said that, it's why the expression exists, comfort food. They derive some sense of comfort. So eating produces a psychological thing. So think about it. So you make an unhealthy psychological association with eating that somehow makes you feel better, and then physically, eventually, it catches up with you. And then, no matter how much psychologically it makes you feel better, physically, it's killing you. And now you have to contend with the fact that you've made this psychological association that it makes you feel good when it's physically killing you. So you're trapped.
It's a feel-good drug.
Isn't that what all drugs are? They're all about feeling good. Where somebody like David Goggins is saying that you don't need that. You just need to embrace how shitty it is and just remember that it's only temporary. Like the expression in the military is embrace the suck. Right? Yeah, it sucks. Yeah, it's fucking shit. And yeah, you gotta endure it. But it's not forever.
You get a cheat period, and that donut is so good. That one day, every 2 weeks, you have a donut. Oh my god! Like, it's not like forcing yourself to live a harder life in like, you know, you're looking for real virtue. It's not like you're losing out.
Okay,
in appreciation.
All right. So then the reality is, then the food that is not good for you is just that. It's not good for you. But it's only not good for you if you're eating it all the time. So much to your point. Then, so if you're eating it sparingly, and you're treating it like here's a treat, a reward, and you do it like once a month or once every couple of weeks, then maybe that's all it becomes.
I bet it's more impactful as a reward than it is as a, you know, every other day feel good.
Okay, so then the reality is that once you've turned that into a daily consumption, the reality is it's a threat to your physical health, and you may create an unhealthy psychological association with it. So then you can't resist it. So it's not the very definition of addiction, right?
Sounds like
it. So then that mental association, that's a perception. And the perception is that it makes you feel good, but the reality is it's physically killing you. But if you approach it objectively, because everything that we've talked about in terms of like choosing to eat like junk food daily, that's entirely subjective, because the reward is psychological. It makes you feel good. So it's an entirely subjective experience. So that's out of balance. So if it's in balance with an objective view, which is the reality that it's harmful to your physical health, but it's harmful only if you're eating it every day. So if you're not eating it every day, you're probably okay. All right? So that's the objective truth versus the subjective truth of what we're talking about particularly, right? So again, it's the struggle in the allegory of the cave between reality and perception or interpretation of reality, right? Which is what the allegory clearly demonstrates, right? The allegory is meant to describe the different perceptions we have in life. It also addresses how our understanding of reality can change based on what we see and experience, how humans perceive reality, and whether there is a higher truth to existence. Now, to me, answering that question is like paramount. That's the driving force, right? Is there a higher truth to existence? And some days I think there is, and some days I don't think so, right? And it's okay. The point is that for me, it's just a personal drive. I don't suggest that everyone else adopt it. You find your own way, right? So it happens just to be my way. So when you look at interpretation and perception, again, even based on like interpretation is the action of explaining the meaning of something, right? Or so then you assigning a meaning to something. Perception is the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. So remember in the cave, that limited sense experience, the shadows dancing on the wall, that's the entirety of their sense experience, and it informs the way they see their reality, right?
Yeah, they perceive the shadows and they interpret it as reality.
That's it, right? So then perception can easily, so two things come out of that. Perception can easily be manipulated so that you're not seeing what's actually occurring, you're just seeing what you perceive to be true, right? So again, if someone can present something that that addresses your sight, your hearing, all your senses, your sense of taste, sense of smell, all those things that influence the way you see things, and that you interpret it, which is that you assign to it some kind of meaning. right? To the perception, that you interpret it to be reflective of self, which is another way of saying you subjectively now make a decision about what it is, right? So again, something that could be
assess it and categorize it.
Right. So then again, you can see where it can very quickly become misleading, right? And then when we talk about reality, it's the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealized or an idealistic notion of an idea, right? So reality then becomes, you could, Jadua Krishnamurti used to often refer to it as the actual, what's actually going on, right? Versus what you think is going on. That's how he used to talk about it, right? So you can say that reality, then you can equate it to what's actually occurring. So when you're looking at things and you're perceiving reality or what's actually occurring, that requires objectivity. It requires you to suspend your biases, your prejudices, your preferences, anything that would allow for you then to interpret what you're seeing. You don't want to interpret it. You want to go, here, state categorically, these are this is statistically and empirically, this is what is occurring. So, for not to be confusing, stuff that's measurable, the stuff that you can, to a degree, be definite, say definitively that this is what it is, right? Versus what you think it is. So many people hide behind what they think things are. They often use it as a defense for everything that they do. It's what I think. It's my opinion.
How many arguments could be avoided if people didn't, start saying, like, I think you think this about me? It's like, wait a minute. So not only are you, you get it.
Well, that's, again, like, we talked about this before, the 10 logical fallacies, right? So that's a straw man thing. But having said that, I think that we need to understand that, like, subjectivity and perception and interpretation of things, biases and preferences and prejudices, because they're such a real thing and because they do influence our behaviors, I think that then you're kind of forced to sort of be able to understand and become familiar with these things that are working as a part of your psyche to influence your behaviors and the decisions you're going to make, that they're there. And I often hear people go, I don't have any. Well, the reality is, if you're raised within a society that informs your position through religion and culture and education and socialization, we're kind of all come into it built, or not, it was created in us, but to have these opinions and biases and all that stuff can act to divide us. Where objectivity goes, remove that subjective experience, remove your opinion, your preferences, your prejudices, and your biases, and what's left then? What are you seeing then? If you remove that, because they're filters on what you're experiencing and seeing, if you remove them, then what's there left to see? That's objectivity. It's what there's actually left to see. Reality. What's really going on? What is actually occurring? So then it's in that objectivity where now you would be able to have the capacity to pause, choose a course of action, because you don't need to react. There's no requirement. You're basing it purely on the fact of what's actually occurring at that given moment.
Yeah, point of frame, like the reference point you're taking, is always important, because I hope this analogy works. The idea that someone says which direction's up, well, relative up from my position on Earth, someone from across the globe.
Actually,
what is up, really?
Yeah, okay. I think that does it well. So I would agree. I think that illustrates it perfectly. And so this is the thing that most of us, whether we're struggling with it or not, you struggle with it in some capacity. So whether you're consciously aware of that, that's what you're struggling with, or you're completely out of touch with that, or completely unconscious to the fact that these things are at work, they're playing out in you in one way or another. And then I've stated this before. The reason you suffer is because you favor your subjectivity, that you think it's important. It's not that you're not supposed to have those things. The failure becomes that we treat them as though they have, not just that they have value, but they are more valuable than other people's subjective worldviews, and not just that they supersede objectivity. So the moment that, like, then now you prefer your interpretation, you prefer your reception. And remember, in the Allegory of the Cave, what did he state about the other prisoners who weren't freed? They would try to kill him for daring to try and challenge their perception and interpretation of what their reality was versus what reality might actually be. Right? And again, because it's a painful process, but pain's only ever temporary. And so the discomfort you experience in growth and learning is only always temporary. But the pain and discomfort you experience from trying to drown out your subjective view never ends. So to me it seems obvious. Then all your efforts should go into understanding, cultivating objectivity, to learn to be able to distinguish between when you're being subjective and being objective, and to see how much those things are impacting you. But how do you do that? Well, it requires a great deal of time. And then there has to be a level of awareness. You have to be aware that these things even exist. Is in common conversation, do you think that this comes up? Do you think this is the kind of thing that people talk about?
I mean, our conversations.
In our conversations, they do.
No, I really like meeting people that have these kind of thoughts going through their heads. Not only like,
but it's more than just casual thinking like that. Here's the difference. It's the kind of learning that you're undergoing that's going to produce a profound change in you. So you can't. So
yeah.
Casually thinking about it doesn't do it. It's directly proportionate to the effort you put in. So the more serious you take it, the more effort you put into it, the greater the realization, the more profound the impacts. And then it moves you into a different direction. You become something more closer to like self-realized or actualized, or the full the realization of the potential that exists in you. Maybe not the full potential, but proportionately that you're starting to turn that stuff into something real, physical, right? Because it becomes you. It becomes the defining hallmark of you, and then it grows as you grow and you learn.
It becomes a necessity once it's in your field of view.
Right. So I think we've clearly illustrated that the struggle between the things that we talk about are not new. People have been thinking about it for thousands of years, right? And so it's a part of the human experience, right? So as we're trying to move forward and trying to understand what it means to be human, for those of us who actually do think about that, you can take some comfort in the fact that you're not the only ones, that there's far more of us than you would imagine, and that we envision we want to see the human condition improve to a degree that then things that we struggle with now, like homelessness and poverty and just reckless ruination of human lives, become a thing of the past. I don't know that it entirely can, but it shouldn't be from a lack of trying. It shouldn't be because you just throw your hands up and go, not my problem. kind of all of our problem. So you get to choose to live in the cave or live in the light. I don't know that there's really much of a choice there. Right. So I just really briefly would like to then just talk about how influential the allegory of the cave is, and just in terms of how much it's acted on society and humanity since the time it was written. So it's influenced every philosopher that came after it. It's in media, multimedia, in some form or another, filmmaking directly and indirectly. So you'll see references to Plato's Allegory of the Cave show up in Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, right? This is a famous dystopian novel of a fireman, Guy Montag, who burns books for a living until a new acquaintance forces him to consider his values. Through literature, Montag discovers the outside world, right? He's the prisoner, who's essentially the philosopher, right? You can all be philosophers. You don't have to be trapped by what you think it is that you are. You can explore information, you grow. And here's a perfect story that illustrates that, right? Then we have Country of the Blind by H.G. Wells. So it was written in 1904. Incidentally, Fahrenheit 451 was written in 1953. So, and in this Plato-esque story, a man with a sight stumbles into a land of the blind where all the villagers lost their sight due to a disease. However, not only can they not see, but they don't believe anyone else can. The man fails to prove to the villagers that he can see, and in the end is unable to save them from an impending rock slide because he can see it and they can't. Right? So it's the plight. So what I like about it is now those who escape, the prisoners, the philosophers, it's their plight. They can see the rock slide and they can't save anybody. And it perfectly illustrates what Plato talked about, that you can't make them see. You only can set up the circumstances so they end up having the capacity themselves to see. But you can't do it for them, right? Lead a horse to water, can't make it drink. So, and of course in the ever popular Matrix movies, the Matrix franchise, but the very first one, 1999, the popular film follows Neo as he discovers the world he was been living in is actually a simulated reality, and Neo decides to leave his comfortable existence and learn the truth. So, in a manner of speaking, outside the fiction, aren't we all Neo?
I forgot the significance of his name, but I think they try to...
Neo is new?
Oh, yeah. They even try to represent it.
Yeah. Another great example of it is The Truman Show from 1998. Again, really great movies. And as for Fahrenheit 451, that was a book I read in high school, but that not aside. In this movie about a TV show, Truman Burbank lives a fake life that is used purely for the entertainment of others. Slowly he begins to chip away at the facade, and even though everyone else around him refuses to admit it, he's right. Well, again, the plight of the philosopher, right? That you can only make the discoveries on your own, because there's no value in someone doing it for you. There's no appreciation. There's no sense of satisfaction and reward. So you, the individual, you can have all that, but it requires you then to make the effort to become the philosopher, or as Plato referred to, philosopher king. So to me, that means a wise leader. So every individual then has to cultivate the highest potential in them, so that they can be leaders, and they do it as a result of the pursuit of wisdom, which is what philosophy means, philosophia. You're a lover of wisdom, right? So that's something everyone can aspire not only to be, but can be. We all have the capacity to do it. We all do.
The great thing about philosophizing is you actually get an appreciation, a true way to temper the idea you come into. Otherwise, you might become tyrannical with that idea.
but if you're truly, but here's the thing. So if you're a true philosopher, a true lover of wisdom, would you become then a wise tyrant? I think it's an oxymoron. I don't think there is such a thing. So then you either become the tyrant or you become the wisdom keeper. You become the philosopher.
I think ideally they would be too busy looking for new questions to be able to tyrannize others.
But all I meant by leader, the qualities of a good leader, that they're inspirational, that their concern is with an ideal leader, an idealized leader, or a leader of high efficiency, somebody whose concern is those who he serves, right? Leadership is not the way we imagine it, that we exist to serve the politicians. That's the way it is contemporarily. But it's a great leader, somebody who serves the general membership of the society. Everybody can do that. So to become a philosopher king, so to become a true king among kings, means that you serve others first, with barely consideration for yourself, because you don't give a shit. It doesn't mean nothing to you, because what's meaningful to you is the love of wisdom. So you see the value in the service of others, not a servant, right? Which is a juxtaposition in terms of the way modern day politicians and politics is conducted. We are servants of the political class. I'm like, maybe they got it kind of wrong. Right? And if you want to be a king, if you think that, which to me means leader, it's another way of saying leader, and then the highest expression of leadership is somebody who inspires others and lives in service of others. Become philosopher kings then.
How great would it be to have a community of people inspiring each other, going, "Oh, you did something so amazing! I'm gonna put something out there too."
But also for it to be much more subtle than that too, like where you literally give each other a helping hand. You help each other to facilitate what you each want, and then in doing that, everybody gets to realize the things that they would love to do and be most.
I think it's fundamental to humans that they want their community to be happy, be content, like really, like nobody's going out there saying, "Oh, I wish everybody was having a bad day." Like it's unrealistic to think that we're inherently bad creatures.
We're not. I wouldn't suggest that we are. We have a propensity to being really good or really, really bad. And then here's the thing: you get to decide which way you're going to lean.
So we're diverse and adaptive.
And so some days you're going to lean maybe one way more, and another day the other way. To me, it just seems like that you have choice, and that because of choice, you can choose to aspire to greatness, or you can choose to wallow in mediocrity or to be average. Right? And nobody wants to be mediocre. We just accept the role because of the context of society we live in. And I'm like, you can exist outside of that. Create your own culture. Right? And so a perfectly good place to start would be to ground your culture in inalienable rights. Right? And in freedoms and rights as individuals. Those become the things that we cherish most and we promote most. And then the idea that every person could be the highest expression of whom they truly are. And that as a society, we exist to facilitate that. Because if a society is made up of realized and great individuals, then what kind of society is it? Realized and great. If the average society, if you follow my reasoning, so in contemporary society, if the average person is kind of mediocre, then what does that say about your society? And the majority are mediocre? Or poor? Well, what kind of society is it then? Mediocre or poor?
Could be a disintegrating society.
Have you taken a look in the mainstream news?
I care
you don't even have to answer it. You don't even have to answer it.
I was gonna make a joke, but instead I would just say some. It's kind of terrifying. It's kind of liberating, but this idea that uh, I regret. I haven't said this. Someone else said this. If it sounds smart, not me. Regret is something that you see. Shit. You know what I'm talking about. It's like
Try and articulate it, please. Take a moment.
regret is when the person you are now meets the person you could have been. I'm not sure if that's
honestly that actually I like the way that sounds. So the regret is you now after having met the person you could have been. Right? So, and I've always stated this. I felt for the longest time, especially when I was in, because I've never been always been this cheerful self that you see before you. In more darker times, I used to feel like I was walking through a world where all I could see was wasted potential. That we had the potential to do anything, and yet we did nothing. And it troubled me. It troubled me for a very long time. But it was mostly because I felt that way about myself too. The realization was that I wasn't living to my potential or realizing the entirety of who I am, and not in a materialistic kind of way where you're talking about monetary gain. That as a human being that somehow just I'd fallen short or just couldn't. And part of the trap was because living with the expectations within culture, society, from education, religion, all those things, because all that stuff creates those expectations, and very often they're unrealistic. And instead of walking through life expecting things, I'll walk through life trying to create things. So then becoming an artist and living. And then the greatest creation is what you do with the life that you have and you. And so the only way to facilitate and realize all your potential is through learning, education that you guide, and training, methods of training and different modalities that draw out all those potentials in you and then fully realize them in you and the individual. Right? So that's the beauty of what being human is. We can be anything. Excuse me.
There's so many cool people out there. Everybody could be one of them.
Well, I'm just saying, just that to me, it just seems that everybody has a story, and everybody's really unique.
Yeah, from day one.
So you could refine that uniqueness. So you think of it like I'm gonna use a sword or a knife for a metaphor. So if you apply the right kind of stone to it to sharpen, to draw out the edge, you can create such a refined edge that nothing can resist it. A human being is like that. If you apply the right training methodologies, you can hone them to being exceptional examples of what they're capable of. And I would argue that it's not only worthwhile, that could be your culture. Can I get a time check?
1 hour, almost 30 minutes.
I think this might be a perfectly good place to stop. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing? How'd you find Plato's Allegory of the Cave?
Pretty good.
Just kidding.
No, I preferred the Truman Show, but yeah, thank you. Make your culture. I don't know. I'm excited.
Because I think it's real. I think it's never been more relevant than now. Globally and nationally, even amongst smaller communities like cities and family units. Now we have an opportunity here. You can see this as being a decline or troublesome times, however you would choose to characterize it, or you could see this as a time for an opportunity for us to come into our own. But that's entirely up to you. So I would choose to be optimistic and enthusiastic in that optimism, and that see that here's a potential for great beneficial change, where now the individuals come into their own finally. 5,000 years of recorded human history, and individuals have been trampled on by every major fucking ideology, every major empire, every kind of thinking. And now I defy each and every one of you who are listening to this, that this is the moment when you can rise to your full potential, right? That each and every one, that then we live for each other to that end. And then what we create then is a body of what we do is we create a species of completely realized philosopher, warrior, poets. If culture is whatever you choose it to be, then why can't we be that? Right? And then that informs everything that comes after it. It creates the scientists, the engineers. That you're not one thing. You're everything that you could possibly be. To me, there's no greater value than that. But that's just me.
Not to build a false characterization, but you're saying we should all try to obtain this badassery?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's not only doable. I think everybody, that's your birthright.
That's a pretty cool birthright.
But here's the rub. You only get it from the work you put into creating it. It only gets realized, you treat it like art. That you have to commit your ass to doing stuff. So then that means then, again, beat this to death. Find the right methods of training. Seek understanding. You seek it through learning, and you seek it through knowledge, and constantly growing. You never become complacent in where you are. And you constantly evolving. And in that constant evolution, you realize then the entirety of who you are. Then everybody becomes a philosopher king. Everybody. No one gets left behind. And to the capacity that you're capable of. So again, it's geared towards you, the individual. You just realize everything that you can with what you have. And you don't wait. There's no perfect time. You start right fucking now. Right now. So I think I think that's enough from out of my mouth. I think right? So I think I'm just going to close. Would you like to say goodnight, or is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
I had fun. Hope you guys did. You gals, yeah, everybody.
Yeah.
I hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope nobody disliked it.
Yeah, me too. I want to thank you all for being here. For those of you who take the time out, thank you so very much. I do love each and every one of you, and I appreciate that you could find the time in your day to actually to listen. I would just like to close by saying, question everything, including yourself. Seek balance, seek knowledge, seek understanding. Become a renegade individualist, humanist, critical objective thinker. Thank you for your time. Good night.